Good morning. Where is everyone? Okay, well, let's get started. Today we are talking about Portuguese and why it sounds so different from the other Romance languages. The story of Portuguese begins in the Kingdom of Galicia in the Middle Ages, where language was seen as an expression of art. Any news you want to share?
I've never seen a more accurate depiction of a morning class in college than this opening scene in Arrival. It's funny, but also sad. Everybody, and welcome to the Cinema Psych podcast where psychology meets film. I am your host, Dr. Alex Swan, and in this episode, we're going to meet some aliens and see how they talk to us. Yes, we are exploring the linguistic loveliness of Denis Villeneuve's 2016 sci-fi drama Arrival. Yeah, that one. Great story. It's based on a book by Ted Chiang, which was a 1998 novella called The Story of Your Life. The film itself was adapted by Eric Heiserer, and the film stars Amy Adams as our protagonist, Dr. Louise Banks, a linguist, a famous linguist who teaches at a university. And you might have heard in the stinger that she goes, "Where is everybody?" when she gets to class, because she hasn't seen the news. More on that in a second. The film also stars Jeremy Renner as a theoretical physicist, Dr. Ian Donnelly, Forrest Whitaker, and perhaps one of my favorite roles of his because he does not care about anything except the mission, Colonel Weber, who runs a sort of joint task force for the first contact, I guess, with the aliens. Michael Stuhlbarg plays Agent Halpern, a CIA operative who is a mean old man. Mark O'Brien has a small role as a trigger-happy captain in the U.S. Army. And Si Ma plays General Shang of the People's Liberation Army, who has command of the China site. The only other, speaking role that you get, I suppose, is three girls who play Louise's daughter, Hannah. So we see Hannah at 6 years old, 8 years old, and 12 years old. And that's pretty much it. This is a very focused story on Louise Banks. So what is the story? Now, the movie is called Arrival, not to be confused with the 20-year previous film about aliens called The Arrival. You gotta be very careful about that one. But in this one, like I said, was adapted from The Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang. Okay, so there are aliens, extraterrestrials, however you want to call them. They arrive to Earth in a set of 12, a fun dozen. In the beginning of the movie, though, we see that Louise's daughter, Hannah, at the age of 12, dies from an incurable illness. Interesting, right? So we see that at the very beginning of the movie. But the rest of the movie is set during this first contact period. What are called heptapods, because they have 7 limbs, not to be confused with octopuses or anything like that. They have 7 limbs and they have cephalopod-like characteristics. The way that the animators created the heptapods is really interesting, because while the limbs move very fluidly, the base, the body of the aliens seems very rigid and doesn't have any kind of eyes, mouth, nose, no sort of protrusions. It's just like a cylindrical column that goes that is vertical, right? And then has these 7 limbs. And then at the end of the limbs, the heptapods have these sort of additional finger-like appendages at the end of each limb, and then a hole that comes, or that is at the opening of these appendages, where this like inky like substance comes out. And that inky like substance creates what are termed logograms, which I'm sure we'll get into in this episode, which are kind of like characters that you would see in East Asian languages, Japanese, Chinese, or like Mandarin or Cantonese, Korean, etc., but far more complex than those kinds of grams, and much more complex than even letters in an alphabet, right? Whether that's the Latin alphabet or the Cyrillic alphabet or the Greek alphabet or whatever, right? So these 12 pods land everywhere in the world, and so each government is working their way to figure it out. And they hire Louise to be the linguist to decipher their language, which I think is really cool, because rather than like going into it like guns a-blazing, although some people do want to go guns a-blazing, they go in with this understanding mindset. Let's understand who our visitors are. Let's try to communicate with them because they appear to be extraterrestrial. That was pretty cool. Pretty cool.
Here are some of the many things we don't know about heptapods. Greek, hepta 7, pod, foot, 7 feet, heptapod. Who are they? Trying to answer this in any meaningful way is hampered by the fact that outside being able to see them and hear them, the heptapods leave absolutely no footprint. The chemical composition of their spaceship is unknown. The shell emits no waste, no gas, no radiation. Assuming that the shells communicate with each other, they do so without detection. The air between the shells is untroubled by sonic emission or light wave. Are they scientists or tourists? If they're scientists, they don't seem to ask a lot of questions. Why did they park where they did? The world's most decorated experts can't crack that one. The most plausible theory is that they chose places on Earth with the lowest incidence of lightning strikes. But there are exceptions. The next most plausible theory is that Sheena Easton had a hit song at each of these sites in 1980, so we just don't know. How do they communicate? Here, Louise is putting us all to shame. The first breakthrough was to discover that there's no correlation between what a heptapod says and what a heptapod writes. Unlike all written human languages, their writing is semasiographic. It conveys meaning. It doesn't represent sound. Perhaps they view our form of writing as a wasted opportunity, passing up a second communications channel.
And so both Louise and Ian work together in very close proximity day in, day out, trying to figure out who or what these creatures are and their language. And so Louise defies military orders by taking off her hazmat suit within their ship, because they cannot leave their ship because of the atmosphere that they need and everything like that, the kind of gravity, all of that stuff. And they work with whiteboards, and they take pictures of each of the logograms, and they figure out what each of these kinds of things are saying. They have sessions with the heptapods, 2 of them named Abbott and Costello, and try to figure it out. They're just trying to communicate. And as Louise begins to understand their language, even at the basest sense, her perceptions begin to change. And of course, we're going to do spoilers in here, right? She begins to have memories, but she's very confused by many of these memories because they're actually memories from the future. We might call those things premonitions, but they feel to Louise like she has already experienced them, which I think is a really cool time travel structure, right? It's a form of cognitive time travel, the kind of time travel that you see in X-Men Days of Future Past, where Kitty Pryde uses her powers to send Wolverine's consciousness several decades, 50 years into the past or thereabouts, right? And other films have used this kind of time travel as well. Like Butterfly Effect is another good example of cognitive time travel, of the protagonist trying to change the future by making small changes in his past, that kind of thing. So it's a really cool way to show time travel, but with only one character's perspective. And it really hits at an important debate, I think, that is occurring or has occurred in cognitive science. And so rather than talk with a psychologist about the cognitive aspects of language on this, I thought maybe let's talk to a linguist who does this kind of work. Not really this literal kind of work, because we haven't met aliens yet, and we haven't had to decipher a completely extraterrestrial and foreign language, right? All of the languages on Earth are similar in many, many ways, even if they are different and unintelligible by practitioners. I thought let's get a linguist on here to sort of talk about this debate from a linguist perspective and my cognitive psychological perspective and understanding of how language and cognition and language as a feature of cognition, a function of cognition, comes together. So let's go ahead and hang out with some Abbott and Costello and talk Arrival. My guest host today is Dr. Jeff Punske. Jeff is an academic linguist working at Southern Illinois University. I'm so happy to have another Illinoisan professor on the show. He works primarily in the areas of morphology and syntax, and I'm sure he could describe what that means here in a little bit. He co-edited the book Xenolinguistics Towards a Science of Extraterrestrial Language. Hey, perfect show for him to be on. Published by Routledge in 2023. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, Alex, it is great to be here. I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so happy to have you on. I'm happy to take a show about psych and expand it into the cognitive science realm, and having a linguist on. I was about to say linguistic on, but sometimes I gotta. Sometimes I get stuck in that.
Bio, accidentally, I typed linguistic instead of linguist for you, and then Google was like, "I don't think that's what you meant."
Right. I get tongue-tied on that all the time, and I'm sure that it's not helpful for your field that it is so commonly used in the adjective form, right?
That's true. But there's also a dirty secret that every linguist misspells the words linguistics and language constantly. It's like a rite of passage. The moment you start misspelling language, you know that you're sort of arrived as a linguist.
Excellent. Okay, well then maybe I could give myself a sort of pass on the linguistic side, because I do misspell language all the time.
There you go.
Yeah, so honorary, I guess. Honorary. So you work at Southern Illinois University, and did you guys just finish, or are you finishing?
We just finished. I submitted my final grades were due yesterday at 8 a.m.
Nice.
So, and I finished grading pretty close to that deadline.
Okay.
So we are now just starting into our summer. You can tell that campus is starting to get a lot quieter.
Yeah.
What about you guys?
Yeah, we finished a week ago. We had our commencement last Saturday, and so
okay.
Yeah, everything's cleared out, and a couple of mini May semesters. I think they're like 3 weeks or something like that.
Yeah,
are starting, and then a colleague of mine took a group, or is taking maybe in the next day or so, a group to London for a study abroad. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
No, we have a few of those May session summer classes going, but I'm fortunate I'm not doing any of those.
Yes, right. I'm not either. I've got a book to start writing, right? What kind of classes did you teach this last semester?
So I taught syntax.
Okay.
And then I just by happenstance, I also have a sort of personal interest in Stoic philosophy, which I'm trying to tie in a little bit more to linguistics over the next few years, looking at some of the ancient ideas about language. Uh-huh. But I had an opportunity through our honors program to teach a class on Stoic philosophy. So it was a kind of a rare kind of treat for me to teach that. Also some real nice applications with, maybe a more clinical psychology.
Yeah.
I had a student that was obsessed with cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay.
And, was always bringing in all sorts of the sort of therapeutic side into that class. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, there's a lot of language components to CBT as well because of how it is offered as a therapy, right? It's a talk therapy, and so you gotta know what language to use.
The reframing and stuff like that, which I think will apply a little bit to some of our conversation today, even the ways that we label things.
Right. And so with that in mind, I wanted to go back to something that I mentioned in your intro. So could you explain a little bit more about what morphology and syntax are? Because I think that will actually apply to our discussion about the film today.
Oh, absolutely. So in the broadest sense, morphology and syntax morphology is focused on the internal structure of words, the sort of subcomponents that sort of combine together to form words, and the ways that those behave differently across languages. So some languages have a lot of different, means of encoding information, encoding grammatical information, semantic information, all packed within a single word, where other languages tend to have, words that are much more kind of freely standing and independent. And English is more on that side of things. Not quite as extreme as some of the other languages, but very much, like we don't put a lot of, we don't like mark something as an object using like accusative case or something, unless it's a pronoun. And so, we when we're looking at morphology, we're looking at the ways in which languages build their words, the different processes that they use and what happens when you do that. And syntax is kind of the same. It's just at the next level, looking at, then how do all of those words combine together to form our sentences. And again, massive variation in the ways the world's languages are going to do that in really interesting ways.
Yeah, I've found, because this is a sort of side interest of mine as a cognitive psychologist, how fascinating languages are. And anytime I see something on Reddit talking about language, I sort of go down a rabbit hole every single time. And one of the things that fascinates me about English is that, it's this Germanic language that is so loosey-goosey and has yet become, because of politics and expanse and money, has become the lingua franca of the world, right?
Right.
Which is so strange when you compare it to other common languages that are out there that also spread, like German or French or Spanish, right? Very expansive languages from the European side of the world that have so much more structure to them than English does, and it's always fascinating.
Well, I mean, so that's the interesting thing, is that all languages have structure.
Right, yeah.
And it's just that the ways that a language is going to encode that structure. So, you compare German to English, so they're both Germanic languages. Right. But because German has all of those case endings and things like that, you're a lot actually able to, kind of present different information, manipulate the word order in a way that we really don't do as much in English. Like we don't move the object to the front of the sentence very often to kind of say, hey, this is the topic we're talking about.
Right. Yeah. This is what we're talking about.
So, so it's a really interesting interplay in the ways in which the structure of the language kind of influences the way that that language is utilized. Yeah,
it's very fascinating. And so let's take that topic and apply it to aliens, extraterrestrials. Before we jump into the language of Arrival, and the fact that the main character is a linguist, I wanted to get your thoughts about the movie itself. What did you think of it?
So I love the movie. I think it is a fantastic film. I've seen students watch that film really recently. One of my colleagues here in philosophy actually shows it in her intro philosophy class every year.
Oh, and I interesting.
Come in at the very end of that and have the same. It's a very similar conversation to what we're having today.
Okay.
But most of the students have never seen the movie.
Yeah.
And so like the emotional impact that the students are getting from, the reveal about the daughter and all of these time displaced scenes, I think is really it's such a great story, even if you just separate from the language part, which obviously I'm going to find super fascinating and super interesting.
Right.
And then I thought, it's a very beautiful film. Very, the cinematography it's very pleasant to watch. And then you also have, I thought the actors did a great job.
Yeah, and one thing that I'll add to that, because I agree with everything, is that it doesn't feel like it is 2+ hours or whatever it is.
Right.
Because even though it's a slow burn of a story, like the pacing is really good too. Like there's a great reveal and then a transition, or not a reveal, I should say, a memory. The reveal comes at the end, right? Yeah,
right.
A memory interspersed scene, and then it comes back to what we would consider our present, and then we explore the present a little bit, and then another memory, and it just keeps moving. And I think that really is really captivating. And you bring an important point with the emotion of it. My students this semester did highlight the fact about how sad the daughter stuff was, and the fact that it plays on this, like, don't be sad that it's over, be happy that it happened kind of sentiment, right? That platitude that is said quite a bit, right? And so I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I think Villeneuve did a phenomenal job with this, and such a small cast too, right? We spend so much time with Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner that you kind of forget there are other speaking roles like Forrest Whitaker.
Absolutely. And you, I mean, again, you have this really contained story of this family and, you know, the trauma of this family, but it's cast in this, you know, first contact situation. So it's, I mean, it is a really, and like, that's, I think one of the things that makes that movie so special is that it is really fundamentally the story of a family. And it's just in this broader science fiction context.
Right.
But it's, you know,
and I like to think of it as, even though, and I said this in the intro, even though it is a grounded story, excluding the extraterrestrial aspect, but it is a grounded story in that, you know, we're with a character in a particular time period. I do consider it a time travel story, and it is one of there are several kinds of time travel, but this one is the cognitive time travel. And as a cognitive psychologist, I do love me some cognitive time travel because I talk about mental time travel all the time.
Right.
When I talk about memory and it being an important aspect of episodic memories, episodic declarative memories. So the fact that she has become unstuck from time because of understanding this language, that I'm fascinated by how they did that. And I kind of gave it away to my students when we were halfway through, because I saw some confused faces and they're like, isn't that a spoiler? And I'm like, yeah, but you know, they're kind of giving it to you. Right. on a plate, right? But it's really the end of the story that makes the reveal even that much. Not so much the daughter, because we see the daughter die in the first 5 minutes.
Right.
It's really the end of how the story with the heptapods ends. Is that's the real cool reveal. So I didn't give that away, but I did like, what kind of memories would those be if she doesn't have any children right now?
Right. Yeah, that would be, you know, if this were to really happen, you know, obviously minus the extraterrestrials, it would be, you'd be worried about delusions, those kinds of things, you know, someone being detached from their actual reality.
Right. And the opening line, and I think I want to use this as jumping off into the first question that I have for you, Jeff, is, so Louise's opening monologue is essentially the foreshadow, the hook for the entire thing. And she's like,
I used to think this was the beginning of your story. Memory is a strange thing. It doesn't work like I thought it did. We are so bound by time, by its order. I remember moments in the middle, and this was the end. But now I'm not so sure I believe in beginnings and endings. There are days that define your story beyond your life. Like the day they arrived.
You experience time as a past thing as opposed to anything else, and that was your story. But it's not, because there's another way that you can experience your life, and maybe time perception has something to do with it, because the end of her story is the beginning of our story with these folks. So Louise here is experiencing time in a different way than we all experience time in this story. She is experiencing time basically all at once, which is revealed at the end. Don't worry, I gave a spoiler warning already. Which is revealed at the end to be how the heptapods experience time. They experience time all at once, and their arrival, roll credits here, their arrival is asking for help in 3,000 years.
Right.
And so nothing that Louise is ever going to experience because she'll be dead by then. But they need help now. They need humans to learn their language and become unstuck from time as well, or unstuck from time in the sense that how we experience it.
I need you to send a message to the other sites. I don't understand. What is your purpose here? How can you know the future? I don't understand. Who is this child?
My first question to you is, because time is a language product, a product of language, how we experience it, why is it that she now experiences time differently to us?
So, I mean, that's kind of the crux of where, what we know about language and cognitive science probably is going to differ from what actually happens in the movie. So, she learns this language and becomes sort of unstuck from time, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. I think there's a couple interesting questions we can ask here, also some of which are grounded in the reality of the film. The first is it learning the language that unsticks her from time? Okay. Because she writes the grammar and teaches people to do it, but we don't see others that are unstuck in the same way. Okay. So it could be, obviously I think that's part of the film, is that her mastery of the language has allowed her to do this. Mm-hmm. But when we look at what language is and what its relationship is with time, I believe that we perceive time as we perceive it as humans, sort of separate from language. Interesting. It's then the labels that we apply and maybe some of the metaphors that we use that are going to sort of color that sort of perception. Mm-hmm. But this idea that your language is going to determine your perception of time is probably not correct. That there probably is just sort of a human sense of what time is. Okay. I actually saw a video. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist, was trying to create a metaphor or an analogy, probably a better word, for the history of the universe, right? To take that time scale of 14 billion something years or whatever it is. 14.5 billion years or whatever it is. Yeah. And put it into a scale that we can understand. So in Cosmos, they, which he did a few years ago as a sort of a second season to Carl Sagan's Cosmos, he was, they put it on the galactic calendar, and they made it a 12-month thing, and human history is the last minute or so, right, of this calendar. So it was time for time sort of a scaling. But he was using this other analogy of distance on a football field, which I thought was interesting, right? But before he went into that analogy, he was talking to Chuck Nice, co-host on Star Talk, and he was explaining dog years, right? And this is a common concept that we use to describe why dogs live so much shorter lives than humans do, right? And so 6 or 7 years for every human year or whatever is a dog year, right? Right. And so he was like, how does a dog experience a week, right? Going sun up, sun down for seven times. Mm-hmm. And how does that then compare to a human, right? And so I think you have the right idea there, because he was talking it from a physics point of view, that there is some biological perception of time that we don't really have access to. Right. Where language is something that we have access to, but we don't have access to this perception of time.
How you feeling?
I need some sleep, but I'm fine.
Yeah. I was doing some reading about this idea that if you immerse yourself into a foreign language, that you can actually rewire your brain.
The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. The theory that it's the theory that the language you speak determines how you think, and
yeah, it affects how you see everything. I'm curious, are you dreaming
in their language?
I mean, I've had a few dreams, but I don't think that makes me unfit to do this job.
So that brings me to my next question, which is sort of the broad linguistic idea that this film is sort of offering, right? And that is the idea of linguistic relativity, or more commonly referred to as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, of which there are two.
Right.
So could you explain from your linguistic perspective, because I have a slightly different understanding of it from a cognitive psychological perspective, what the Sapir-Whorf hypotheses are?
Sure. So the two hypotheses are the idea of, as you mentioned, linguistic relativity, and then also the idea of linguistic determinism.
Okay.
I want to start with determinism because that's the stronger form. So linguistic determinism basically is this idea that the language that we speak fundamentally shapes and controls the way that we perceive and think about the world.
Okay.
So you see this quite frequently in various. I'm going to use my example I always use in class is BuzzFeed articles.
Okay. Yeah. No.
So
good.
You'll see like 15 untranslatable words from the world's languages that, words that can never be translated in English. And, the hilarious thing is that they're always translated into English.
Mm-hmm.
What they mean is words that don't necessarily have a one-to-one word to word translation.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like these concepts are inaccessible to us.
Yeah, completely foreign.
You also find it, but this idea is that you learn a language, it fundamentally shapes the way that your perceptual systems work, the way that your broader cognitive systems work. And it basically is this almost unescapable prison.
Yeah.
The weaker form of that is linguistic relativism, which is that the language that you speak fundamentally influences and again has that sort of shaping effect, but it's not as absolute as the determinism.
Okay.
And so you have more of a I think this would really be more of you might think of this as somewhat of a spectrum, because as I think we'll get into, there's some limited evidence for versions of relativity.
Okay.
It's just pretty weak relativity. But so the more extreme versions of this idea that you can't learn terms that are from, that are of various, not part of your language, that if your language, I'm going to date myself a little bit, but it's probably it might be about 20 years ago now.
Okay.
There was an economist who tried to do this analysis based on whether or not a language had future tense and the savings of those cultures.
I do recall this.
Yeah. And there were all sorts of problems with that study. The way that the languages were classified as whether or not they had future or not future. Very systematic.
Okay.
But the idea was that languages that lacked a future, people were better at saving because they didn't view they viewed the future and the present as the same sort of time.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the evidence for that kind of perceptual influence is pretty weak, or in many cases there runs counter to what we actually find.
Okay.
But that's sort of the nuts and bolts of the two different versions of that hypothesis.
Okay. So you would say that there's convincingly not enough support for the determinism strong hypothesis.
If you really take that to the extreme, it would mean that once you've learned a language that you would be fundamentally unable to learn, we shouldn't be able to learn new concepts.
Okay.
We shouldn't be able to, so that I think kind of falls apart. Now, whether or not, again, you could probably find more nuanced versions of that, again, maybe it's a spectrum, but definitely language and cognition are related, but they're not identical. And I think that's a really important point.
Okay. Yes, that is an important point, because my next question is, okay, so you mentioned some of the relativity aspects, so the weaker hypothesis of this idea having some flimsy support, but flimsy support in my view is like a lack of support. So one of the ideas in a cognitive psych book in language is a discussion of this hypothesis and literature that is supposedly supportive of maybe the weaker hypothesis rather than the strong one, the relativity versus the determinism. And I think it's a Winrauer. I can't remember the second author's name at the, and it was about 20 years ago. This paper came out, 07 maybe. And it is a favorite one of the textbook author that I use, Bruce Goldstein. He talks about this one in pretty much every edition that he writes this book. And it is a comparison of a series of shades of blue. And so matching, you're familiar with this one, right? Matching a shade of blue to a target blue. And in this study, they had American English speakers and Russian speakers, and comparing the words themselves. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce the Russian words for this because I'd say it in class, but I'm like, guys, I'm probably wrong when I say this. Because they're written in Latin, they're written with Latin letters, right? They're transliterated as opposed to in Cyrillic.
They're not in Cyrillic.
Yeah. So I'm like, I'm probably wrong on this, but here you go. And so I describe it to them. What is your take on this kind of literature? I'm sure there's others out there.
There's absolutely others out there. So I want to explain a little bit about why we'd be looking at blue, particularly looking at American English or English speakers in general and Russian speakers. So one of the things that we look at when we're looking at color terms in languages, we want to look at what's called a basic color term. And this is like basically the word that we use to describe that color is not viewed as sort of a type of another color.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Doesn't have like a modification, like, so, like English, like we might talk about something being sky blue.
Yeah.
But that's still a type of blue.
Sure.
So the key thing that distinguishes Russian from English is that Russian makes a distinction between two different shades of what English would describe as blue as basic color terms.
Interesting.
So the lighter blue that we find in Russian has a term. I'm also not going to try to pronounce it. I also don't remember what it is.
Right.
And then darker blue also has a separate term. And there's, to get into, if you look at the Russian flag, their lighter blue, that's the blue that's that light blue color.
Okay.
And then the American flag uses the other term. And if you mix those up to a Russian,
they will be very upset.
You'd get a scolding.
Okay.
So one of the questions is, well, does this change our way that we sort of interact with blue? Other studies that have been done of the same type look at, again, you could do a comparison of English and languages. So the studies I'm familiar with look at some indigenous languages of the Americas, namely Tarahumara, which is a language of Mexico, and Yucatec Mayan, also a language of Mexico. And they have what we classify as a groon. Or a gruel. It's bloon. It's a combination of blue and green.
Okay.
So they have one term that expands that whole color spectrum. So what's really nice about color is that we can define it like using physics. We can say, you can create ways of sort of defining the physical space that different colors inhabit.
Right. Their wavelengths
and
or whatever.
So what a lot of these studies do is they look at like colors that are equally apart in sort of the physical sense, but cross language boundaries, cross the boundaries within these different languages, and then ask, okay, so how do the speakers perceive these? But this is really a labeling phenomenon. So, of course, if you're asked to do something that is a task that is essentially physically impossible to say, are these two colors more alike or less alike? You're going to utilize whatever you can to do that. And if you have labels for and have categorized these within some of these basic labels, you'll actually, you'll use the linguistic system. But there's been some really clever studies that sort of separate out the ability to use those labels. And I can't give you a citation off the top of my head.
That's okay.
But where they kind of pull away from the ability to use those labeling, the labeling phenomenon. And what they get there is you find that it doesn't actually, speakers will behave in the same way across different languages. So certainly I think this idea of of language sort of being the means of which we express our cognition is important. And that is going to shape certain things that we are able to either communicate, or even if we're forced to, do certain types of tasks, we might utilize our linguistic system as a tool to help us use those tasks. Yeah. But that's not, but it's not changing our actual, I would argue it's not changing our perception. of these colors.
Okay.
Like we still perceive them as distinct items.
Yeah.
It's just that like we don't label them as distinct items. And that's a sort of different phenomenon. Going back, I forget when this came out, but there was years ago, probably about 20 years ago, there was an article where people were arguing that ancient Greek, the Greek, Homeric Greek, they couldn't perceive the color blue. And the idea was, so if you read the Iliad, you read the Odyssey, it talks about like the red wine seas or the wine deep seas and things like that.
Huh.
But that doesn't mean that the people couldn't see blue. Even if there's not a label, we can still perceive blue. And, we can also see this very clearly. There's some people that really know all their different color terms. If you go to a paint chip thing and you're like, what's this? They're going to be like, that's cerulean. And I'm like, I don't know. I know cerulean is a color.
Yes.
I don't know what color it is. I don't know what type of color
Couldn't
it is.
pick it out. If you presented me with a bunch of blues and said, pick out the cerulean, it would be a guess.
Right. But I can tell that it's different from other shades of blue.
Yeah,
so I can
absolutely.
still perceive that even though I don't have a label for it.
Sure.
So I think it's a labeling phenomenon that we sometimes confuse with a cognitive phenomenon.
So you would, if I understand your argument correctly, you would say that it is a one-way street as opposed to a bi-directional street.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. It is a one-way street. It's our perceptions are being channeled through our language, and then language is not channeling our perceptions.
Okay, so let's take this to the movie then, because I think that's a good. I think we have a good basis of understanding of where I would put myself as a cognitive scientist, where you would put yourself as a linguist and a cognitive scientist. So how is it then, would you say, or is this going into the fiction part of science fiction, that this heptapod language is changing the way that Louise is thinking?
Yeah, that's magic.
That's magic. Okay.
that's that's the fiction part of science fiction.
Yeah.
So
where do you think the because it was based on the novella by Ted Chiang, where do you think he got this idea from then? Was he looking too much into the fringes, so to speak, of linguistics?
That's such a great question. I wish I knew more about where Ted Chiang got the inspiration. I mean, it is a fantastic basis for a science fiction story.
Yeah.
So, to part of me is like, who cares? Yeah. I mean, I do think I do think he's looking, tapping into this sort of general idea of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which I think is something that is cognitively or culturally something that's still very strong. Like, I mentioned those BuzzFeed quizzes earlier. We have this idea that language is this sort of like, kind of molds our cognition or our means of understanding things. But there is so when we go back to the development of this hypothesis, when we contextualize it within the time that it was developed, I think there is a piece of it that is very similar, not identical to, but very similar to some of the development, and particularly the Whorf's work on Hopi.
Okay.
So Benjamin Whorf, the second half of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, he was working on the Hopi language. He actually misidentified a number of the grammatical properties of Hopi and sort of
interesting. Okay.
From that sort of misidentified the sort of nature of the language. But he was also really interested because kind of contemporaneously at this time, you have Einstein's development of relativity.
Okay.
Interesting.
And so I didn't actually
we also
place
see,
that.
we actually see the sort of this attempt to apply relativity to Hopi and try to explain this sort of very different means of understanding time in a way that almost, it's not like the same as what the heptapods do, but you can see the kernels that maybe Ted Chiang maybe indirectly or even directly was inspired by to develop that. Now, of course, but there's also all sorts of challenges with this, like, particularly the fact that his description of Hopi was just wrong.
Whorf's description of Hopi?
Whorf's description of Hopi was just wrong. And I think there's also, getting into a much broader cultural context at the time where this idea of indigenous languages were viewed as lesser than. And even though I think Sapir and Whorf got descript things wrong in this hypothesis, what they were trying to do was demonstrate that indigenous languages were as robust and grammatically complex as Western European languages, which is undoubtedly true.
Yeah. And I think you can say that about any language that exists on this planet or has existed, right? Or will exist.
Exactly.
So then So I guess my question is, for maybe suspend your disbelief here for a minute on the hypotheses and how it's presented in the movie. So we get these logograms that are created by this inky substance from the heptapods, and they have this extreme structure, and we're shown full aspects of analysis, like the honing in on a tiny little bit that comes off one end and like what aspect that has.
Everything you're doing there, I have to explain to a room full of men whose first and last question is how can this be used against us? So you're gonna have to give me more than that.
Kangaroo.
What is that?
In 1770, Captain James Cook's ship ran aground off the coast of Australia, and he led a party into the country, and they met the Aboriginal people. One of the sailors pointed at the animals that hop around and put their babies in their pouch, and he asked what they were, and the Aborigine said, kangaroo.
And the point is?
It wasn't until later that they learned that kangaroo means I don't understand. So I need this so that we don't misinterpret things in there, otherwise this is going to take 10 times as long.
I can sell that for now. But I need you to submit your vocabulary words before the next session.
Yeah.
And remember what happened to the Aborigines. A more advanced race nearly wiped them out.
It's a good story.
Thanks. It's not true. But it proves my point.
We produce some prime number sequences backup. So that's something.
Well, congratulations, you're a parrot.
It's a lot more than that, you cheeky bastard. Don't you see? They can't seem to follow our algebra, but complex behaviors. That clicks.
Well, that doesn't make any sense at all, does it? Problem is, not everyone shares our policy of being open with the aliens. Have you met General Shang? The call sign for him is Big Domino. Whatever Shang does, at least 4 other nations will follow.
Luis, you have to gain ground today.
Okay.
You have a vocabulary list for me?
I do.
You're gonna teach them your name and Ian's.
Yeah, so that we can learn their names if they have names and then introduce pronouns later.
These are all grade school words. Eat, walk. Help me understand.
Okay.
Oh, no, not the top.
Okay, this is where you want to get to, right?
Here's the question.
Okay. So, first, we need to make sure that they understand what a question is. Okay, the nature of a request for information along with the response. Then we need to clarify the difference between a specific you and a collective you, because we don't want to know why Joe Alien is here. We want to know why they all landed. And purpose requires an understanding of intent. We need to find out, do they make conscious choices, or is their motivation so instinctive that they don't understand a why question at all? And biggest of all, we need to have enough vocabulary with them that we understand their answer.
I get it. Stick to your list. Just don't add anything to it.
I guess my question is it even possible to dissect something so complex like that into our structure, right? A human structure?
Great question. You know, obviously we don't have alien languages to look at. We can't
Sure.
be like, oh yes, you know, well, we know from the heptapods, or the heptapods not that likely because, you know, the Exarians language that we've studied so extensively. So, you know, but I think what we can say is that when we compared what they do with the sort of analysis of heptapod to the analysis of what we find in human language, it is very accurate.
Okay.
Or, you know, cinematic, but still a pretty accurate description of that process where, you know, what we're trying to do when we're encountering a language that is new to us,
First contact
sort of situation.
Yeah.
Is you're going to look for those little bits of sort of consistency and try to analyze those first.
Okay.
And so you're going to try to establish what the, and utilize the things that are consistent to try to help us understand the underlying structure. And so I think that part is pretty accurate. Now, we don't have humans that produce language by spraying an inky substance out that then forms into a logogram and things like that. And most of what we do when we're looking at documenting a language is through either spoken or sign.
Okay.
Simply because writing is not a fundamental piece of language. It's sort of an add-on.
Yeah, it's a little add-on, right? And I explain that to my students as well. Like we talk about language first and foremost as speech and listening, right? Speaking
right.
And hearing before we even get to the visual aspect of language, because those just become symbols for
right.
the audio. Yeah. So that's okay. So that's really interesting. And the other aspect of this that I wanted to ask you about is, so they speed it up for the purposes of the story, right? We can't spend years with these aliens in a movie, right? And so there's this later scene where after the explosion happens, because you've got the trigger finger army captain who is just like, these aliens are here to kill us or whatever. But Louise is taken into the inside portion of the spaceship. And we have this subtitled experience. But Louise is speaking English, right? And I forget which one is the survivor of the explosion, Abbott or Costello. I don't remember. I think it's Costello. Is just kind of like doing his rumbling, his guttural sounds as it makes sense to me. It won the Oscar for best sound editing. So whatever they did was amazing, right?
Right.
And I don't remember if he's inking at her or not, but we just see the subtitles at the bottom.
Right.
And then she speaks back in English, and then we see the subtitles and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So we are as the audience member to assume that, she understands this language now. Like she can communicate with it and they understand her. But that begs the question, it seems like they always understood English, right? Or
probably.
All of the other languages that they were,
yeah,
the 11 other.
Well, particularly if they're time displaced and they learn English later, then they probably have always learned. So, I mean, that's part of that science fiction phenomenon.
Yeah.
But I also think that connects to a broader issue in science fiction when it comes to language. Now, Arrival is kind of special in that language is one of the key foci of the movie.
Yeah.
But, language in science fiction is always kind of a problem. And the solutions to it tend to be pretty inelegant,
Okay.
You find, look at Star Trek. They have a universal translator.
Right.
It's just, a magic device. And then, of course, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy takes that even further, where it literally is a magic or organic fish that you put in your ear, and it makes it so you can understand all languages. So, trying to get past the sort of language piece of the story. And I think, this is probably something that Arrival is doing here too. It's kind of leaning on those tropes of science fiction where, at a certain point, you just have to move past the sort of challenges of translation and things like that. It is, certainly conversations can occur cross language like that, but it is a little unusual for one party to speak one language exclusively and another party to speak another language exclusively.
I had the same thought.
Yeah.
I just watched the Cloverfield Paradox, which came out about 8 years ago or something like that. And Zhang Ziyi is in it, and she's a famous Chinese actress, and she is the only person who speaks Mandarin completely throughout the whole film, where everyone else on this space station or the spaceship is speaking English, including the Russian guy and the Brazilian guy, because those people can speak English rather well. She's not as fluent as they are, and so they're just like, okay, well, let's just subtitle her throughout this movie. But it makes it odd that she's the only one, and then they all have to know Mandarin, and they're just, one person speaks to her in English and she speaks back in Mandarin, and it makes that, and I was taken exactly to that scene in Arrival. I was like, yeah, that's the expediency, I guess, of the story. Right.
And that it's not atypical in science fiction to see dialogue that is structured almost exactly like that, where you get the audience, and sometimes it might even, so we don't know. Part of that is also probably that the biological systems just don't allow Louise to produce this language. So maybe it's a little bit more plausible in this context, where the heptapods probably don't have the same vocal apparatus needed to produce human language. and Luis doesn't have the same whatever apparatus they're using to produce those clicks.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that I think in other contexts, it's just part of this. It's almost a trope within the genre. I think if you've seen Project Hail Mary,
yes,
no spoilers, but it occurs there as well.
Right. Yes. For the sake of the story expediency. And I also was reminded of the scene in Arrival when that happened. And I was like, yeah, okay, I get it. We need to move the story along and this is not a language movie. This is we need to save our star kind of movie and a buddy movie sort of
right.
Way. Yeah.
The Cloverfield paradox, which I have not seen, that's actually probably the most problematic in terms of what a mission would actually look like. They would be using a lingua franca. That is,
yeah,
then all the crew would be.
Exactly.
I'm Colonel G.T. Weber. We never formally met, but 2 years ago you did some Farsi translations for Army intelligence.
Oh.
You made quick work of those insurgent videos.
You made quick work of those insurgents.
You are on the top of everyone's list when it comes to translations. And you have another 2 years in the SSBI, so you still have top secret clearance. That's why I'm in your office. I'm not at Berkeley.
Okay.
I have something I need you to translate for me.
Why are you here? Can you understand us? Where did you come from?
Now you heard it. What do you make of it?
Is that...
Yes.
How many?
How many what?
How many, speaking?
2. Assume they were not speaking at the same time.
Are you sure? Do they have mouths?
So how would you approach translating this? You hear any words? Phrases?
I don't know.
So what can you tell me?
I can tell you that it's impossible to translate from an audio file. I would need to be there to interact with them.
You didn't need that with the Farsi translations.
I didn't need it because I already knew the language, but this is...
I know what you're doing.
Tell me what I'm doing.
I'm not taking you to Montana. It's all I can do to keep it from turning into a tourist site for everybody who has a TS clearance.
I'm just telling you what it would take to do this job.
This is not a negotiation. If I leave here, your chance is gone. Good day.
Colonel? You mentioned Berkeley. Are you going to ask Danvers next?
Maybe.
Before you commit to him, ask him the Sanskrit word for war and its translation.
So one more thing that I wanted to ask you about, get your opinions on the film here is, so there are a couple of scenes, one really quick one, and then one that I think Ian Donnelly, Jeremy Renner's character, is sort of talking about. So the first one is when Forrest Whitaker's Colonel character comes and is like, are you Louise Banks? Are you the famous linguist? Blah, blah, blah. And she's like, I don't know if I'm interested in doing this. And he's like, all right, well, I'll go, talk to your colleague then. And she's like, ask him what the Sanskrit word for war is. I'm curious to hear some maybe inside baseball on this one, if you have any insight on this line.
I have no insights.
Okay.
I do know Jessica Kuhn, who was the linguistic consultant for this film. I don't know if she had anything to say about that line, but I know she really wanted them to change the lecture that Louise is giving at the beginning of the film.
She does say that in her paper, yeah.
Yeah, and that the directors were like, Jessica, this is a movie. This isn't a linguistics class. So, but I don't have any, I don't know why. I don't know the significance of that line. I think it does sort of tie into this broader idea that linguistics is focused often on ancient languages. There's some truth to the sort of development of the field coming out of the different sources that it came out of as an emerging science, one of which was the sort of understanding of particularly ancient Indo-European languages.
Yeah.
but I don't think most linguists know. I don't. It's not that I don't think that most linguists don't know Sanskrit. Most linguists, unless they have worked on phenomena related to Sanskrit, are not gonna be aware of that. So I don't know, but I do think it's supposed to be foreshadowing to a future scene.
Yeah. So the pair of scenes for my next question is, so Donnelly is doing some voiceover narration. I would imagine that he is like doing a video log or something, and that's what the audio that we're hearing. He's talking about how how they're developing they're testing how they're developing the language from the logograms and all of that stuff, which then I think then links to the final piece of the language development, right? So we have this like 3-prong story beat for the plot, which is the weapon aspect, right? So the scene focused on...
The voice you're about to hear belongs to China's military chief, General Shang. Pull it up. We got a satellite feed here. Who he's talking to, if you want to look.
Wait, go back. Stop. He's saying that each of the 12 is offering advanced technology. Back again. And play. Our science team is attempting to decode the sets. Sets, I don't know what that means. Something about advantage. Suits, honor, and flowers. I don't know, that's all.
I don't know what it means either. An hour ago, China mobilized forces, and now Russia's following suit. Shang's about to start something.
Following suit, suits, honor, flowers. Colonel, those are all tile sets in mahjong. God, are they using a game to converse with their heptapods?
Maybe. Why?
Well, let's say that I taught them chess instead of English. Every conversation would be a game, every idea expressed through opposition. Victory, defeat, you see the problem? If all I ever gave you was a hammer...
Everything's a nail.
What is the significance of the aspect of translation here, or mistranslation in this moment, from a linguistic perspective?
So it's a really fascinating question and challenge. So, because ultimately in that scene, basically the term that is used in heptapod is a description of a much broader set of things, tools, weapons, things like that.
Okay.
I think there's probably some technical issues with how they arrived on it being a weapon versus, but absolutely this type of mistranslation can happen. This type of if you're, again, we're looking at a labeling phenomenon, and maybe you have people that are with a more expansive or more narrow label, or languages that have more expansive or more narrow labels. And then how do you hone in on what those labels are? I mean, of course, the language gets very complicated in that we have labels embedded within labels, embedded within labels. And so, and here's a case where maybe, English has a difference between the terms tool and weapon. Okay. But heptapod doesn't seem to. Okay. That, they're the same things. It's just the same central label for this broader concept. Right, yeah. So that seems to be absolutely that happens across different languages. That actually gets back to my BuzzFeed quizzes. Yeah. Because it's it's the labeling phenomenon.
So we learned that the thing that the heptapods are there for is to give the language. Right. They're there to deliver the language. And once they're done because they blast it all out and they, take a picture of all of it and everything like that. And they just every logogram that they create, they squirt it all out. It's a weird way of saying it.
Right.
And Louise ends up writing a book about it. Right. And so that's the thing that they're there for. She believes that it's a tool. Chinese believe that it is a weapon, or that they're bringing a weapon, and so that gets their hackles up and everything like that. Tool is obviously a word that in English has a very neutral connotation, possibly even a more positive connotation, where weapon has this negative connotation. Danger is represented by the word, right? Yep. But it's interesting. I taught learning and behaviorism this semester, and I end with a discussion about animals and their cognition within the bounds of conditioning. And I show the intro scene from 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is The Dawn of Man, where the monolith really makes these apes understand the use of the word tool. And what you first see in that scene is this ape pick up a bone from a larger animal and start bashing other bones, and quickly realizes that this is useful, right, in creating other things. Okay. And then if we fast forward, there are two troops of these ape creatures, or our quote unquote shared ancestors with other apes that currently live, right? And they're fighting over this watering hole in this like really arid desert, and they're trying to figure, they're all dying, I guess. And they end up using this big femur, I guess it is, to kill another ape, right? So that tool becomes a weapon. So does this speak to, does that aspect there, the difference between tool and weapon and the overlap that shared fit with your description here of labels?
I would say so, yeah. I mean, and I think you look at the development of human weapons, they until we get into like the much more modern age, which is that they were tools.
Yeah.
They're accepted tools, maybe turned into weirder shapes and bigger, but they were tools that then become used as a means of causing harm to other humans. So, I mean, I think that again they're within this same realm.
Okay.
Well, we don't know much about heptapod culture.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem to me like they have a lot of use for weapons. They don't seem to be very oriented towards a martial, I guess maybe in the past, we don't know.
Okay.
But so it's interesting that, so that's also an interesting, maybe that's one of the reasons why they wouldn't have such a label, is that, they don't have weapons in the same way.
I find it interesting in the nature of the story that they were able to have converging translations across these 12 sites that were ostensibly different language sites around the world. So does that strike you as a commonality in world language, the fact that world languages all have this shared nature to them?
I would say you would expect some variation, but probably more minimal variation in terms of influences. So when we're in the language that we're using as the language of analysis is almost certainly going to have some influence on the ways that we encode the language that we're trying to study. So you might anticipate some of that, particularly if we're not in a situation like this where it's rushed and it's emergent and all of these things.
Okay.
But I do think, because language is coming out of a sort of shared cognitive experience that we have as humans, there's going to still be a high degree of convergence there. We still are fundamentally human.
Yes.
And so that's going to come through regardless of the language that we use.
And our experience of these concepts, right? These abstract concepts, these experiences that we have allow us, even with all of these different languages on Earth, to still have a means for translation and intercommunication.
Exactly. So there might be, the things that separate languages, even though they're on the surface very, very, they can be very large. When we get down into the sort of core of what language is, there's really not that much that separates different languages.
Which I find so fascinating, considering that, Earth is really big and people were isolated for a long time. And, language is very organic. It evolves just like biological structures do, maybe on a slightly faster time scale than biological structures, but that it did kind of just, it spread in the way, but we're all the same animal.
Right.
It's very fascinating. Yeah. It's very fascinating. And I really enjoy how they played with it at the end, which is the big reveal, which is like, do you know Mandarin? That kind of thing. And just like speaking Mandarin just fluently. When did she learn Mandarin, right? But I did find it interesting that they used Mahjong, the Chinese used Mahjong to play with the heptapods as opposed to what Louise and Ian were doing with their translation gig.
Yeah, and I wish, it would have been fascinating to see some of the other translation sites too.
Yeah, it would have. But as you said at the beginning of our discussion, it would have taken away from the family story that is at the heart of it, right? We would have gone to other people and we'd have been like, who are these and why do we care about them?
Yeah, it would have been more focused on the science part of the science fiction rather than the fiction part, which is what makes that story so compelling.
Right. So my last question to you is a broad one. Is there any other aspect of this film as a linguist or somebody who's just fascinated with alien languages and that kind of thing that stood out to you that we haven't mentioned yet?
Oh, what a great question. Nothing. I mean, I really just want to emphasize how cool the movie is because of its focus. Like, I really appreciate that there's this film that is focused entirely on language, with the family story, but the crux of the story focuses on language.
Mm-hmm.
And it really does allow us to kind of have these kind of conversations about what is the role of language? What is it, how does it differ across different cultures and within this sort of broader context of like relating to our cognitive systems.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's such a great film. Like, what a great piece of media. And when it's about your field, it's just like, oh, that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way about Memento and its focus on memory and being very close to how somebody with that kind of amnesia would experience. So I understand the feeling 100% that you just shared with us. Fantastic. Well, I want to thank Dr. Jeff Punske for joining me to discuss Arrival. Before we say goodbye, Jeff, is there anything that you'd like to share with the audience? Where can people find out about your work? Where can people find this Xenolinguistics volume?
So the Xenolinguistics volume is available basically anywhere.
Okay, very good.
Online bookstores. You're probably not going to go to your local bookstore and find it, but a lot of even public libraries own it. So and you can request it from your public library. I also have another book that Jessica's chapter is in from Oxford on the use of constructed and invented language. So you could read more about on how her experience being that consultant with Arrival and how that connects in that book as well.
Was that the one that was the 2020
volume? That's the 2020 book from Oxford University Press.
Very cool. Anything that you're working on right now that you'd like to share?
I'm working right now on a open handbook for MIT that's going to be focused on teaching linguistics.
Cool.
We're running. I'm going to need to ask my publisher again for another slight delay. Things are just slower post-COVID. Even though we're so many years out, it just takes a little bit longer for folks to get things reviewed and stuff like that.
When you're editing and you need other authors to be on top of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. I'm glad I don't have to deal with that with my book. It's just me and my delays.
Yeah. Well, I have plenty of those too. So I'm not gonna blame anyone else for the challenges.
Fair enough. That's fair. All right. Well, this was fascinating, Jeff. I appreciate you coming by.
Thank you so much. It was really fun.
And that's going to do it for this episode. Until the next one, thanks for listening.